What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Thursday, so time for another player breakdown. You guys have been asking for a mid-round quarterback breakdown, so here you go. I asked YouTube and Twitter what quarterbacks you wanted me to talk about, and the top requested players were Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, and Tom Brady. And then I looked at the projections, and all three of them were projected within 3 points of each other. So we definitely need to go over this trio. If you are sad that I'm breaking down these three because you want a different trio, then you can just put that in the comment section below. Upvote the responses you agree with. Hopefully we'll do the combo you're looking forward to next week. You got a few more Thursdays before week 1, so we can still do a few more combinations of 3 players. So please put those in the comment section below. I'll probably do running back next week, but it'll probably be running back or wide receiver. And if you don't want to wait, another week to potentially get your combination, you can always see my exact rankings for every player, every scoring format on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. But with that, let's get things started off with this week's breakdown. And we'll start off with Russell Wilson. Wilson will be entering his 11th season in the NFL, turning 34 this November. And he's missed only 3 games throughout his career, and they all came last season due to that finger injury that caused him to miss a little under the month. But he has been incredibly durable over his career, especially for a mobile quarterback. Many mobile quarterbacks, have these ankle injuries, these little injuries that like pocket passers don't have as much, but he's been very durable. Even when he's been hurt, he's played through injury. So he's very likely to play the whole season. And he's been on Seattle, first 10 years of his career, but is now, of course, a member of the Denver Broncos. And with that change does come a lot of optimism with Russell Wilson. He's had really decent skill players throughout his career, and especially in recent seasons, having Lockett, having Metcalf. Those are 2 really good pass catchers. So while I do think it is a slight situation upgrade, I wouldn't say it's some insane shift in talent. Metcalf and Lockett are still very, very good wide receivers. And while Sutton's great, Judy's great, and of course the running game is a little bit better, I think it's like a little bit of an upgrade there. But the real upgrade is in the coaching staff. That's always been our issue with Wilson. Everybody knows Russell Wilson's awesome. Everybody knows that he'd be an elite fantasy producer if they just let him throw the football. But there's been many seasons throughout his career where they have refused to do that, opting instead to feature the ground game early and then have Wilson bail them out late in the game if they're trailing or if the score is tied. And that's just been maddening to watch at times, but it is likely to change this season. We had, a good feeling that the Broncos would be shifting their offense towards Russell Wilson when they brought him in, but it was confirmed in recent weeks. They've talked about how Wilson is going to dictate the offense, and that's going to mean more pass attempts, a much more up-tempo offense. Especially compared to Seattle last season. Seattle ranked last in plays per game, and it honestly wasn't even that close. I believe they were at 56 plays per game, and the next closest team was a little bit over 59. So they didn't run any plays. Very difficult to have a high-end quarterback in fantasy when the team is not running plays. You can't score if you're on the bench. So at a baseline, Wilson's going to throw the ball a lot more this season, which means he'll see a sizable jump up from his 29.5 pass attempts per game from last season, counting only the games that he started and finished, not counting the game he left early with injury. The real question is, how much will he throw it? 2 years ago, Seattle started letting Russ cook. He threw 37 pass attempts per game over the first half of the season and ranked first in fantasy points among quarterbacks with 318 passing yards and 3.5 passing touchdowns per game to go along with 33 rushing yards per game. He was going nuclear. Then over the second half of the season, so the final 8 games, his pass attempts dropped from 37 to 32, and he averaged 209 passing yards per game, only 1.5 passing touchdowns per game, quarterback 15 in points per game. And what I find most interesting is obviously, if you remember back to that time, it was pretty clear that they were limiting his passing. But what's also interesting is the team itself went 8-2 in the first half, 8-2 in the second half. So it wasn't like they were doing terrible, then changed things. They were pretty much the same in each half. It was more that the game environments themselves changed. In the first half, Seattle let opposing offenses score 30.4 points per game compared to 16 points per game over the final 8 weeks. So you had this start of the season where, sure, they were letting them cook, but they needed to keep up with their opponents. In the second half, their opponents were only scoring 16 points per game. They didn't need to air it out, and that's always the thing with Seattle. When they didn't need to, they didn't. The only time they ever allowed Wilson to throw the football was when they were trailing, and honestly late in the game. They would continue to run the ball if they were, trailing by like 1, maybe even 2 scores early in the game. It was always just like the second half of the game. That's when they let him go off. And so when we have these games where they're allowing, 30.5 points per game, of course they need to let him throw it a ton. And when they were winning, they took their foot off the gas, and it was a little bit different. And I think that's why I'm so excited about Russell Wilson this season. Not only are they committed to letting him run the offense, playing more up-tempo, playing at a faster pace, just like throwing the football more, but they're also in the most difficult division that we've seen in years with unbelievably explosive passing offenses on the other side. They're going to get 6 divisional games. I believe one of the Chargers games is actually in week 18, so we don't get that one. But during the fantasy season, we're going to have 5 divisional games where they are playing very, very, very explosive passing offenses, teams that you cannot say, oh, look, I'm up 21-10 in the second half and like the third quarter, let's start to run the football. They're going to need to keep their foot on the gas. They're probably going to allow a lot of points, even if Denver has a good defense this season. You're going to allow points when you're playing the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Chiefs. You're just going to. I don't care how good your defense is. And to make the playoffs in this division, I mean, even if you have, 10, 11 wins, that's probably not going to win the division. And that's probably going to be like, oh no, are we even going to make the playoffs? You're not going to make playoffs with 9 wins in the AFC. This division is too good. Like, that is going to be very difficult to do. They're going to need 10, 11 wins. And so even in games where they're not playing this division, they need to make sure they're winning these games. And so I think they're going to keep their foot on the gas a lot this season. They're going to remain aggressive, and that's obviously a good thing for us. Looking at my exact projections, I have Wilson projected for just under 37 pass attempts per game with a very slight increase in his yards per attempt over his career average. And I actually have him under his touchdown rate when compared to his career average, just because if we're going to be increasing these pass attempts, well, I don't want to project him for like 45 touchdowns just he's throwing the ball more. So bring down the passing touchdown rate just a little bit, just under the career average. Again, just because like thinking back to like the Seattle offense, if they're running the ball a lot, but then he's scoring the touchdowns passing, well, I don't want just increasing the pass attempts between the 20s to translate to a billion more touchdowns, if that makes sense. Maybe listen to that again if it didn't. But yeah, you got to bring down the touchdown rate if you're going to increase the pass attempts by a ton. I also have him for like just under 70 carries, which is like a little bit under his career average, but he's 34 now, and he's on a better offense. We'll have more check down opportunities. He'll have more opportunities to not have to scramble because people will be open. And so I just think that makes a little bit of sense, bumping him down a little bit. All told, comes out to just under 366 total fantasy points, 9th among quarterbacks in projection. I believe ADP, he's 10th. So how does that compare to the other two? Let's do Dak next. Dak will be entering his 7th season in the NFL, having just turned 29 a few days ago. He'll be playing with the same team as he has been, as opposed to, of course, Wilson changing teams. But the situation's a little bit different this year. Amari Cooper is gone. Michael Gallup is very unlikely to start the season healthy. James Washington just fractured his foot in practice like a day before recording this. That leaves their current wide receiver core as CeeDee Lamb up top, which is a phenomenal one. But then a rookie, late third-round rookie in Jalen Tolbert, Noah Brown, who's, let's be honest, we know the ceiling of Noah Brown. It's not very good. Simi Fehoko, I don't even know how to say his last name, but he's not very good. That's not great. Now, maybe they go out there. They sign Will Fuller. We finally got Will Fuller news this last week. Basically, he said he's going to wait until he's gotten offers, but he's going to wait until later in camp, maybe later into the preseason. He's probably just going to wait out and just see who needs him the most, who gets the most desperate, who can offer him the best contract because they're desperate. But yeah, maybe it's possible that Dallas signs him. But at the end of the day, this wide receiver core is a downgrade from what he used to be playing with. And I know that they have Zeke, Pollard, Schultz, which is a really good trio of players to go along with CeeDee Lamb, but obviously this wide receiver core is not fantastic. One positive, though, for Dak is that the rushing should return. This offseason, they discussed how they were intentionally limiting his rush attempts last season since they wanted to make sure, he was fully confident in the leg. They didn't want to just throw him out there after this massive leg injury and have him run the ball a ton. They wanted to keep him healthy. They wanted to keep him safe. They said that's going to be returning this season, which is obviously very, very good news for his fantasy value. We want rushing production from quarterbacks. Despite the drop in rushing last year, though, he was still able to finish 8th in points per game thanks to a career high in completion percentage and touchdown rate while keeping his interception rate fairly low. This is a good offense, and it's going to remain a well above offense, even losing Cooper, even sustaining a few injuries. Obviously, if they have more injuries, maybe that take changes, but they have enough good players to where this is still going to be a very, very good offense. So how do the projections look for Dak? I gave him a slight decrease in yards per attempt down to 7.4 from a career average of 7.6. To start the season, it could just be a little bit rough. They do have a few difficult matchups, and if he doesn't have some of these playmakers that he's used to having on the roster, it's just possible that his yards per attempt does drop. I also had to kind of drop his just monster touchdown rate from last season since the offense threw touchdowns at a way higher rate than they would on average. They should have on average ran for a few more touchdowns, but I still have him on par with his career average there. And actually, I think he's slightly higher than his career average. And then I went back, basically gave him the exact same rushing production that he had before the injury. All told, projection comes out to just under 360 fantasy points, which was about 5 to 6 points below Russell Wilson. And that's an outcome that I agree with. I like this Broncos offense a lot this season. I like them more than the Dallas offense, and they're playing in a much more difficult division. And so it seems like, looking at their schedule, they're going to be in more potential shootout games, and that's really where the ceiling comes in. Average production for these two is probably going to be fairly similar, but if Wilson's playing more of these games where they're forced to score 30, 35 points, and he's forced to throw the ball in the second half, I like his ceiling more than Dak, because when Dak has to throw the ball, he's not throwing to as good of playmakers, especially early in the season, and so I just prefer Wilson over Dak. But how about Brady? Brady, entering his 23rd season in the NFL, turned 45 yesterday. This will be his 3rd season with the Bucs, and he's coming off back-to-back seasons with 40-plus touchdowns, 40-plus passing touchdowns, and he surpassed his career average in completion percentage and touchdown rate in each of the last 2 seasons, while tying his career average with 7.5 yards per pass attempt. Antonio Brown is gone. Gronk is gone, at least for now, and so they kind of made up for that by signing Russell Gage, signing Julio Jones. They gave Godwin a new contract, so he'll be back. It seems like his recovery is going really, really well. I don't know if he's going to be 100% in week 1, but he's going to be back to, or at least close to his old self, very early in the season. And then, of course, they still have Mike Evans. So a very, very, very strong receiving core surrounding him. And we haven't really seen any level of drop-off for Brady in the last 2 years. So given his supporting cast, it's pretty unlikely that all of a sudden happens this season. Last year, Brady threw the 2nd most pass attempts of any quarterback ever, becoming just the 2nd quarterback to throw over 700 pass attempts in a season. And I have him projected this season to become the 3rd quarterback to do so. And he's the only quarterback I have projected for over 685 pass attempts. I believe the number he's at is 706 or 709. So a lot of pass attempts projected for Brady. I did have to drop his touchdown rate from these last 2 years just a little bit because, Gronk is gone. And whenever Gronk's on the field, Brady's just a little bit more likely to go play action from the 1 and throw it to him. If we get a few more of those plays where they're giving it to Fournette, then it could drop his rate. And we still don't 100% know about Julio. They did kind of indicate that Julio might be used in that sort of role, just like another big body in the red zone when they have, Gronk off the roster. They have Mike Evans, but they wanted that like one extra player. And while you could argue that like Kyle Rudolph could be that player, I think everyone can agree that Julio Jones is better than Kyle Rudolph. So I think they were kind of trying to fill that gap. And we don't 100% know at this point if Julio can do that. And we don't know what Julio is going to give them. I still think Julio's Julio. He's still a great wide receiver. But since we don't 100% know that, again, I did drop the touchdown rate the past 2 seasons. But given how high his career touchdown rate is, regardless, that still gives him with not only the number 1 pass attempts in the league, but number 1 in passing touchdown projection with 39.2. He is going to need it, though, because obviously Tom Brady does not run the ball. I have him projected for a whopping 44 rushing yards, but 1.3 touchdowns, because if you look back over the last 4 years, he does still vulture some touchdowns. When they get to the one, he has that quarterback sneak. So he doesn't need, 200 rushing yards to combine for 2 rushing touchdowns. He can have 40 rushing yards and have 2 to 3 touchdowns on the season. I believe the last 4 years he's had 2 or 3, so even 1.3 might be a little bit low in that projection. So what does that come out to? Just under 367 fantasy points, 1 point higher than Russell Wilson, around 6 to 7 points higher than Dak Prescott, makes him the quarterback 8 overall. And I think I agree with this one as well, but it really is a toss-up. Like, I love both Russell Wilson and Brady this season. Both should have incredible years in fantasy. My lean, if I'm on the clock and I'm going to take one of them, is to take Tom Brady. There is technically a chance that maybe Denver has the season I'm expecting, but they have a spiked season in rushing touchdowns. They have 2 very quality running backs and 2 phenomenal running backs at the goal line. Is there a chance that Williams and Gordon get a little bit lucky, have spiked seasons each with rushing touchdowns, and that has Wilson hitting a little bit below what we're expecting for passing touchdowns? I think that's possible. And since I think that's just a little bit less likely to happen on the Bucs, I would say that Brady has a little bit of a higher floor than Wilson. So overall, my ranking is going to be Tom Brady, then Russell Wilson, then Dak Prescott. But I have the exact same advice as always when it comes to these mid-round quarterbacks and just when you want to take quarterback in general. I want a quarterback in that round 6 through 9 range, and I'm really just looking for the best value possible. I'm not being overly picky and being like, oh, Brady's first in this breakdown, have to get Brady, can't take the other 2. If Brady goes early and then Wilson falls further than he should, take Wilson. If both of them go early and Dak falls way later than he should, take Dak. I think you're just trying to find the best value in this range. But if it comes to your pick, you're like, this is the one I want to take quarterback in. I'm good at these other positions. All these guys are fairly decent values, and I want to secure this quarterback. Tom Brady, then Russell Wilson, then Dak Prescott. So that'll do it for this week's breakdown. Remember, if you have a trio of players you want to see next week, put it in the comment section below. Upvote the responses you agree with. And if you want to see my exact rankings for every single player, every single scoring format, you can check that out at my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. I'll be back tomorrow to go over the FFA and ETR must draft list, Saturday to go over the latest news and ADP changes, and then Sunday to go over some running backs that you should not be drafting on Underdog. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. Hope you all enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting the like button, and how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? Thanks for watching.